Hi guys, hope you're well. So, bit of a strange one today. I'm outside Camelot Castle, which is where Dave Courtney lived before he passed away. And today I'm going to be doing an interview with his very closest friend, Brendan McGirr, also a good friend of mine. Brendan's going to be going through absolutely everything, telling us exactly what happened, his plans for the future, and clearing up any controversies over what took place. So who knows, this may be the last time I go in here. So it's an interesting but sad and poignant day. Anyway, here's Brendan's interview. How are you, Brendan?
I'm coping well, Liam. Thank you very much. The first thing I think I need to say is a massive thank you to everyone for the love and support and the best wishes. I've been inundated from people around the world, and there's been such an outpouring of love for Dave. It has been overwhelming, if I'm honest.
So I think the purposes of this interview is obviously to thank people, but also clear up a lot of things and also give people an idea of what took place really factually.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I've spoke to a lot of Dave's very close friends and been able to give them an insight into the reality of what happened, put a lot of them at total peace. So I hope for the majority of people who haven't had that privilege that this video, you know, what I say here will actually give them some proper closure and peace, and that they can be happy in the fact that Dave chose his way to take control of his life and ended it on a beautiful, happy note in his own way.
So let's kind of go back. What was Dave's health like? Because that's really the kind of central issue, really.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Dave had discussed taking his life with me for years, even as far back as 2015. Dave went to do a show up in Morecambe, and it was one of his usual talk shows in a pub up there, and unfortunately there was a Polish guy up there. I think he was a bit of a local naughty boy, and his words to Dave was, you know, don't talk gangster, show me gangster. So this was before the show started. So Dave did say, I know I've got a problem with this guy, I know he's going to be an issue. So in true British gangster fashion, what Dave done was waited until this big Polish guy was standing at the urinal with his hand having a piss, and then went in and said to him, I'm now going to show you gangster. Yeah, and then he beat him to a pulp with two brass knuckle dusters. So much so the bloke had to have his head tied together with his jaw tied up and everything. There was blood on the ceiling. You know, he beat this guy to a pulp. But it was a big Polish guy, and if he hadn't have done it, a guy would have probably beat him up. So, you know, and he had sort of challenged Dave. So I think Dave was, you know, just making sure that it didn't become an issue to him and embarrass him at the show. And the strange thing was, Dave was willing to go home because he knew that might have been, you know, not part of the show and the people might not have liked it. But everyone's said, please stay, Dave. We all hated him. He was a bully anyway. We can't thank you enough. So he stayed and done his show after that with bits of blood on him and a few bits and pieces. But in that fight, one of the guy's teeth got stuck in between Dave's knuckles, and where it come out, obviously. And Dave just pulled it out and carried on, done his show, come home, didn't think nothing of it. But over the next 2 or 3 weeks, that in fact caused blood poisoning and septicemia, which he ended up going to hospital. He ended up in Queen Elizabeth Hospital at first. They weren't really sure what, they knew it was blood poisoning, but they didn't know what the cause of it was. So they were then treating him with very strong antibiotics, because if it had got to his kidneys, it was 24 hours away from getting to his kidneys, which would have killed him. So they treated him for the infection, but they still couldn't work out, you know, he was still very ill and they weren't sure. So he was sent to St Thomas's, like tropical diseases ward, I think, which only Dave would fit in perfectly there. And by the time they'd assessed him in there, they did at one point, he had a tennis ball on his knee, it looked like a tennis ball, but they lanced it and it was just full of really bad, horrible brown orangey liquid. And they discovered that what had happened, that the antibiotics that I'd given had actually triggered arthritis. So it was probably dormant in him and it was probably growing, but it accelerated his arthritis. So he actually come home from St Thomas's in a wheelchair at the time. He couldn't pick nothing up, he couldn't squeeze nothing with his hands. I mean, anyone who's had anything to do with genuine severe arthritis, it's a terrible crippling disease. And the thing is, you don't look like you've got anything wrong with you to look at. But he come home, and at that point, which was maybe 8-9 years ago, he said to me, if this is going to be how I've got to live, I don't want to be here. And I'm not going to be here. He went, even if you got to put the pillow over my head, you got to go to prison for it, you got to do it, because I ain't doing this.
So what's interesting is that, which I don't think people knew, was that you knew that he was going to kill himself, and how did that pan out?
Well, David, discussed it and pointed out that his life, he weren't happy, he weren't enjoying it due to his ill health and that, and obviously, as his friend who, and I'm speaking on behalf of everyone, none of us wanted to lose Dave. Not anyone who knew him and loved him and had met him would not want him to leave, you know what I mean? He was such a powerful, beautiful presence that you didn't want to lose that. But I had a conversation with him in this room probably over a year ago now, where I actually broke down in tears, and I had to admit that he was right, because he said to me, look, I've got issues with my heart, I've got prostate cancer, I've got severe arthritis. None of these things can really be mended. And what am I getting out of life? My kids come and see me, they love me, he's got no problem with his kids, they all loved him and they come and spent time with him, but Dave's issue was he watched them grow up and they were all being successful in their own right. He'd seen them become successful in their own right. So he had no worries or issues about them. And he felt that his life had become, he was sitting there just for people to come and say hello and get a photo. And he said, the one thing I'm not going to be like the Craze or Ronnie Biggs and have people taking photos of me when I'm really old and crippled just to say they've met me, when I'm not doing any of that. When I'm far too vain, far too proud. So I'm definitely not going to be here. And he went, what do I get out of life? You're coming down and saying hello and helping me get some breakfast or doing things, but that's great for you, but what am I getting out of it?
Was there at any point, did you try and talk him out of it?
Obviously, I tried to talk him out of it at the start, but the more Dave's arguments were so clever, and to be honest, he was right. I couldn't argue with what he was saying, and I knew how bad his health was. I knew the pain he was in. The last 5 to 6 months of his life, Dave struggled to walk. The arthritis was so bad that he would sit here some days and you could see like water coming out of his eyes. You'd see him sitting with gritted teeth. And what had happened was the medication he was on, he'd become immune to it. So it would have taken him another 12 to 16 weeks minimum to find the right medication, if they could locate it, the right injection. But that might have taken 6 months, because it takes 4 to 6 weeks to get the injection prepared that you got to have. Then it takes 6 to 12 weeks to see if it's working, and if it doesn't work, then they've got to start the process again. And there was up to 5 different injections they could have given. So, but it was just finding the one that fitted with his condition, and it is a trial and error situation. And he just was in so much pain, and I don't think, he just in his own head had enough. He was tired, he was bored as well, because Dave's had such an action-packed life. You've got to remember, this is a man who's been to the Old Bailey on attempted murder, made films, travelled the world, done documentaries, wrote books, done porn films, shagged thousands of women. Dave didn't miss out on anything in his life, right? He had an action-packed life, and there was no way the next period of his life was going to be anything to relate to the last period.
So did you have to sort of go through each day thinking that this could be his last day and he could go and himself?
No. Dave wasn't like that at all. Them decisions that he made, he was quite private. But in the last 2 years of his life, I noticed him there was a change in him. He was actually doing, if he'd done anything that he felt was wrong, or he had to change anything in his life, he really went about doing it. You know, like he made peace with certain people that he might have had disagreements with. He'd done his best. He'd done loads of charity work. You know, he gave a lot of people time. He gave loads of knowledge to people. He'd done everything he could. I mean, like, there was just so many different things, but people, like, he'd see a homeless person outside the cafe and take him in and buy him something to eat. Numerous occasions he'd done that. You know, like, we spent, I think it weren't last Christmas, it might have been the Christmas before, but Rocky from down in Kent,
Trolliani.
Yeah, Trolliani. Yeah, I mean, Dave froze to death sitting on the back of a Santa Claus sleigh, right, being pulled by a transit van. And on a Sunday, when it was freezing all day, we went round delivering disabled children's presents, you know, to their house. So children who wouldn't be able to go and see Santa, Dave gave his whole Sunday freezing, delivering these parcels to the children. You know, there was so many different things he'd done that it just, the more I look back now and the time to reflect on it, it was like living with a real life angel in a lot of ways.
So how did his family react to you knowing that he was going to do this?
Listen, the family haven't actually found anything awkward about it. They know that me and Dave had a close relationship, and they know that I mean, Dave didn't sit here and say, "Oh, I'm going to do this today." You know, Dave was a very meticulously clever, planning man. Do you know what I mean? Everything he'd done, he'd thought probably 5 years ahead. So, as I say, this year, like, he definitely felt it this year, and I mean, right from early on in the year, he'd sort of said to me, he had Courtney come here for Christmas and Jen last year, almost like for him that was his last Christmas. He'd got the people he really loved here and had a wicked Christmas. And the more I look back over the course of the year, there's loads of things you could say, oh wow, he done that, so he done that. And it's just a never-ending case of looking at it going, wow, he did know, he has planned this a long time.
Let's go to that final day. How was that day?
The final day was just like any other day really with Dave. He'd got up, we'd had a bit of banter in the morning, we'd had plenty of fun and humour. Mercy and me and him were going to go to the football. Our friend James, who does Dave's social media, got a package off of Charlton. It was offered to him because the actual sponsors had, for some reason, pulled out of that game, the match day sponsors. So they offered James a really good deal on a package for the centre circle. So we'd never done that before. So on that day, we went together with me and Bobby Baxter, Mercy, James, Harriet and Sophie. There was a nice group of people with Dave, really nice people. We went to Charlton. We were well and truly looked after by Bobby Boulder and Peter Garland and all the Charlton people there. They were superb hospitality. We was out on the pitch having photos done before the game. We was in the dugout. It was you can see in the photos that Dave had taken that day that he was genuinely happy.
I think what's amazing is that, you know, so many people know him or knew him, and yet nobody knew the extent of his pain.
No, because Dave hid that. There was the main reason he hid that was Dave was a warrior at the end of the day. Inside, he had the heart of a warrior, and he knew that if your enemies ever see a weakness, then you'd be vulnerable. So, you know, I mean, bear in mind, Dave still knocked 2 men out this year at the age of 64 with all the illness. He still managed to hit 2 blokes and knock them out who really pushed him to the limit. But in his own words, he said to me, I've got one punch in me, a good punch. But he said, if they get up, my arthritis, I'm fucked. He went, so I don't want to lose a fight like that, you know.
So what happened that evening? You'd had a great day.
We had a great day at the football. Charlton won 4-0, which was unusual as well. And we come back here, and me, him and Mercy was really comfortable and happy. We watched the rugby, the England game. England done the usual. They threw it away in the last minute. And Dave was just in a bubbly, happy mood. He was really happy. We were laughing and joking. We said probably, it was about 11:30, me and Mercy and Dave. Dave said, I'm just going to go upstairs. I think he was going up to make phone calls, but he went, I'm off upstairs now. We said, well, we're going to go to bed now anyway. So we went to bed. I watched a bit of Match of the Day in bed. And Dave was on the phone, but we fell asleep. Me and Mercy fell asleep probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock. I woke up about 3 a.m. to go to the toilet, and I could hear Dave chatting on the phone in his room.
Do you know who he was calling?
No, I didn't. We found out after, I think it was Angela, Mercy's mum, he spoke to. But, we were, it was not unusual for Dave to be up talking to people on the phone, because the one thing that people wouldn't be aware of, Dave, is he had to take large amounts of amphetamines because of the pain of the arthritis. The only way he could get up and function was he'd take 3 or 4 grams of amphetamines, which helped him. It's an anti-inflammatory, and it helped him with the pain of the arthritis. That was the main reason he took it. But the side effect of that was he was awake for 3 days. So, he did like a chat at 3-4 o'clock in the morning. but so,
Did you hear anything?
I fell back to sleep just after 3 o'clock, whenever, and I never heard anything. I can honestly say that, hand on my heart, me and Mercy did not hear the gun go off. But they're not necessarily a loud bang anyway.
So people, obviously this is a very sensitive thing. Who went in and found it?
So, the following morning I've got up probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock. Mercy went downstairs to make the tea like she usually done, and I just went in to check Dave to see what he'd want for breakfast. And as I opened the door, Dave was lying on the bed. I could see the bit of blood from the back of behind his head, and there was no pillow over his face. He was actually lying there smiling. Right? He had a smile on his face. He looked really at peace and comfortable. But I touched his head and he was freezing cold. So I obviously walked around the side of the bed, see the gun on the floor, knew what had happened. I shouted down to Mercy. I said, he's done it. He's definitely done it. She come up. She come in, and none of us, because I want people to understand, Dave did not look horrific. Right? The bullet didn't come out the side of his head. It looked like he had a bump on the side of his head. And even his mum, who went to see him in the funeral parlour, said he actually looked worse when he was alive. So, that is what his mum said after seeing him in his casket. But Dave looked at peace. Do you know what I mean?
Because people were saying that obviously if he shot himself in the head, that it could have really damaged his head.
Yeah, but it was a small bullet he used. It was like something like a 2.2 bullet, I think. So it was a small velocity bullet. It weren't a loud bang. It weren't nothing. It was nothing traumatic for me and my missus to actually experience. Do you know what I mean? I see my best friend at peace. I knew the pain he was in, and on that moment, obviously I shed tears because I'd lost probably the best and longest friend I'm ever going to have in my life. But I had to go into a sort of adrenaline mode to then, I'd been prepared for this. David always said, whatever day this happens, you need to be on the ball and do things right for me and my family. He'd left me instructions, how he wanted things done, and I've done everything to the absolute best of my ability. And that morning, the first thing I'd done upon finding him, me and Mercy had a couple of minutes with him. We both kissed him and cuddled him and said our goodbyes. And then I phoned Jenny and Courtney because they live local. I knew I didn't have a lot of time once I found him in reality, but as long as I could get some of the family and get the message to them before it went public, then I felt that I'd done my job. So Jenny and Courtney come round, however shocked they were, but both of them come in, they kissed him, they cuddled him, they said their goodbye. Courtney said, I forgive you, Dad, I love you, Dad, I understand. She was so brave and strong, Courtney. I'm so proud of her. And Jen, But Dave should be proud of all his children. You know, they've all done really well.
He was very proud of his children.
He was extreme, and rightly so. He's got beautiful children. Do you know what I mean? So then I made the phone calls then to his sister. I tried to ring Dave's daughters, Levi and Chelsea, but I couldn't get through. So I rang his sister, and I said, "Look, before I ring the police, can you go to Dave's mum's? Go and tell her directly at the house, Sue. Just drive there. Don't do it on the phone. And so make sure his mum is, you know, in a good place when you tell her, and she's able to cope with it as best as possible." So Sue went to the house, but she also rung her brother Pat on the way there. And, you know, whether Pat felt he wanted to be the first one to say it, or for whatever reason, he immediately put it on Facebook that his brother had died.
Really?
And unfortunately, the sad thing was I hadn't been able to tell other members of the family, and Dave's other daughter Lily was on a bus on the way here to see her dad, just on a normal day to come and see her dad, not realising what happened. So she found out that her dad had, you know, committed suicide or killed himself on Facebook.
Oh, that's terrible.
So by the time she got here on the bus, she was quite distraught. So, I mean, I'm sad that happened. It could have gone a little bit better in that respect. But, you know, I'm afraid social media and the way people live now, it's like they're desperate to put something on social media. For whatever reason, I don't really understand it. But, you know, I guess that's just the world we live in now. But it was sad in the fact that, you know, we could have had a little bit more privacy time for the family to process it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Before it went public. So...
Did you then call the police?
Yeah, I had to call the police straight after that. We called the police, let them know what had happened. And then once the two armed police officers arrived, it then becomes like a crime scene, and we're taken out of the house. So, you know, we had to leave with whatever we had with us, whatever we was wearing, we were taken out of the house. And then it becomes a full forensic job for the police. And... listen, they are very professional people. You know, whatever the conspiracy theorists want to say. I mean, there was some knob apparently on the internet at the time, some Ray geezer, some Ray Bang Bang Hill or some knob like that, saying that he had videos of men coming in Dave's house to shoot him. You know, what a fuck. Right? But the truth of it was, the police come here, they've checked the CCTV. They told me from the minute their forensic people walked in the room, they were fully aware of what had happened. Yeah, they swabbed me and Mercy for gun residue. They done full forensic tests on us with DNA. We were only ever interviewed as witnesses to the scene. So,
because some people had suggested online.
Oh, I've heard all rumours that I shot him, that I opened the door for two men to come in and shoot him while I was having sex with my missus, and he shot himself because I got a girlfriend. I mean, this is just, people have got, you know, people's lives are that empty that they love making up this stuff. And it's great for internet chat, do you know what I mean? It's great for someone who hasn't got a life, sitting in a shitty bedroom somewhere, being able to say something like that. But
I've hated all the stuff online where they've said, you know, the last footage of Dave, or Dave on his deathbed and stuff, and it's just all rubbish, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah, well, listen, I'm totally at peace with everything I'm telling you here. I've got no issues. I don't really look at that social media. I only go on what some people tell me. I'm not a believer in... I just don't really look at it. It doesn't bother me. Dave was the same. None of us have ever looked at social media. It's not something that we follow, to be honest.
How did the family cope? Have they been obviously grief-stricken? Are they okay?
Well, I mean, how do I put this? Dave made his death beautiful, in a way, because when we realised the amount of effort that he'd put into taking his life because of how he felt, and he tried to make it as painless as he could for those that he loved. Do you know what I mean? He genuinely, and you know, like, try and understand the mental pressure that must have been on that man to deal with the issues of his health, knowing that he didn't want to be in, knowing that the circus that it could be how his ending's done. Do you know what I mean? So it was a big responsibility he took on, and he took a gamble that his family would understand.
The funeral, was there ever going to be a big funeral? What were his wishes?
His wishes were, David discussed it with me months and months before. He said, look, I've been part of the biggest naughty boy funerals this country's ever seen. I don't want to try and compete to be in this funeral thing. He said, I loved doing the funerals when I was alive, but he went, I'm not going to get anything out of it when I'm dead. Right? So, and he went, the stress and the pressure it will cause you and my family. He said, I'm thinking of everyone concerned here. And it was other issues for Dave that were really important. Dave had people, I mean, genuine, real friends that he'd been friends with for 40 years, who'd been in the criminal world with him, been in the TV world, that had gone through his life, who were, all of them were worthy of carrying his coffin. You know, there was probably at least 1,000 people that would have been worthy of carrying Dave's coffin, and he had to choose 6. And it was one of his biggest issues that he didn't want to offend anyone at the end by maybe someone not getting in the church that should have, maybe someone, you know, being put in the wrong place. He didn't want anyone to leave that whole thing that day with a bad feeling about him. And he felt that he couldn't do justice to everyone because the funeral would have been a bit of a fiasco. You know, so
I think people were wanting to actually come in and see his body, weren't they?
Well, I had issues with, you know, unfortunately I had to get Dave cremated 2 days early because people did sneak in to see him, although they were his friends, you know what I mean? But the family had asked them not to, but they felt they needed closure. But it was sad for the family that happened. So, but we decided to have him cremated quicker because David, his last wishes were he'd shared his life with the public all his life. And he knew he was a public figure, and he was quite prepared with all the stuff that came with, the good and the bad. He'd lived with all that, but his last thing, because of how he ended his life, he wanted his family to have the privacy of just speaking to him or having them last moments in the funeral parlour, because he'd insisted he didn't want a ceremony where even his family went. He wanted an unattended cremation. He wanted his family to meet up at his house while he was going to be cremated, and he wanted it to be just done on his own and then brought back to his mum. So, like I said, the reasons are all there, and if you actually study the whole thing of Dave's passing, everything actually makes sense. Once you see it for what it is now, the funeral would have been a fiasco. It would have been hard work. There would have been disagreements. There would have been issues that, you know, it would have been very hard to cope with. It would have been a major thing for the police to try and control. So, I mean, his humbleness, Dave, at the end of his life, was the thought he had for others was just, when you sit back and look at it, it was overwhelming.
So I think when people grieve, they sometimes want like a focal point to go to. Will he have a plaque somewhere? Will he have a gravestone? Or
and he's not going to have any. He didn't want anything like that. He wanted his ashes a private thing with his mum and his family. They'll decide what they're doing. That'll be a private matter. As Dave's whole way he looked at his life, he shared his life with the media and the public. And when he was alive, he gave you 100% of himself. You know, whether it be, you know, if he hit you with 100%. If he spoke to you and gave you knowledge, he gave you 100%. If he loved you, he gave you 100%. So everything he'd done in his life, he shared it properly and done it properly. And that last bit of his life, he just wanted it to give something back to his family, his children and his proper loved ones, that only they shared that.
Incredibly brave in a way, just to go out like that, because it takes a lot of bottle to do what he did in the end.
Well, I genuinely, from my heart, believe that David lived his life in such a way in the last few years where he felt he'd earned whatever the afterlife is. And, you know, Dave done a documentary just before he died saying, or a podcast saying that he was the afterlife. You know, he felt he was the afterlife. But, you know, his view was, I think the last act of his life, to take his life, was like a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm. Was he particularly religious? He had a faith, didn't he?
Dave had a faith, right? I wouldn't say it was a religion, but he had a faith in that what's right is right. You know, the truth is the truth. And if you can justify everything, he will tell you, if you look at any of his past podcasts and interviews, he will say that as long as he could justify everything in his life that he'd done, as long as he felt he'd done right in doing it, then, and his justification was all right, he could live with it. And I think that's how he died. He could justify what he was doing at the end of his life, and it sat right with him. And because Dave lived his life in a strange way, probably 2 or 3 years ahead of all the people around him, like, I think in 2 or 3 years all this will make total sense, and everyone will go, oh wow, what a clever move, what the right thing to do, you know. And
in a way it's kind of nice almost to see him go out young. You know,
exactly, he's gone out looking well. I mean, the last photos of him that day at Charlton, he looked superb.
Yeah.
He was fully compos mentis. Yeah, he knew what he was doing. He was in total control. You know, in his immortal words, he stopped the ride. When he wanted to get off, he stopped it. Right, he'd had enough. And I believe in it. I don't know if this makes sense, but I believe in some way he immortalised his soul.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Only a few more things I was going to ask. How has it personally affected you, and how are you coping?
Personally, like I said, I felt Dave couldn't have shown me any more love with how he's dealt with, how I've had to deal with this. He gave me probably, you know, over a year's knowledge that it was in his head, and that he wanted to do it, and he made me understand the reasons fully. Do you know what I mean? And justified them, and I could see him, I could understand it. So I didn't, you know, on the day that he passed, I felt relieved for him, although I know I've lost my best friend, but he's left me with 30 years of the most funniest days of my life, right? Some of the most dramatic, some of the most exciting, everything in my life concerning Dave has been nothing. Even the bad days were good. Right, he made the bad days funny, and he made the bad and the sad days good. He gave me strength, he gave me wisdom, he surrounded me at the end of his life, because of the position he's left me with his children and his family. I genuinely feel their love. They have shown me nothing but love, and he's put me back with mercy. It's almost like he's had mercy upon my soul. So I've got no complaints. I will love him and miss him dearly for the rest of my life. But for what he's left inside me, I feel that I'd be quite happy now to go around just telling you the stories of how funny he really was, and some of the inside stuff that, you know, me and him had the most darkest humour some days. And living with your best friend, you could have that humour, it didn't matter. Even, you know, look, I'll share this with you. Before he died, there was a couple of times he said to me, I'm really bored and I want to go. And I've gone, oh, don't do it this week, Dave. It's Arsenal Man City. I said, if Arsenal win, you'll regret it if you do it before. You know, and we used to joke about it. And, you know, like, he'd said to me one night, no, I feel, you know, I don't think I can go on much longer. And Charlton were at home on a Tuesday night. I went, come football, Dave. Just come football. You might feel a bit better. So I went, and unfortunately Charlton lost 3-0. So we come home, and I was sitting here with him, and I couldn't help it. I said, Dave, I've got to be honest. If you're thinking about it tonight, I think I'll do it with you. I said, we are shit, you know what I mean? And he just laughed, and he looked at me, I'm not doing it now. But he said, I'm really concerned here. I feel like I've got to end my life round the fixture list. And I said, well, you know, a little bit of consideration for those who are going to be here afterwards, like, you know what I mean? Like, on the international break would have been better.
Must have been a moment that he must have been scared about the whole thing.
Listen, I don't think anyone, if you're really honest, I'm sure he had some fear in him, but his overriding faith, would have conquered that fear. I mean, I lived with Dave and was close to him for you know, 25 years. You know, we knew each other for 30 years, but we were really close for the last 25 years. And Dave had faith which made him so brave. You know, like, he was a calculated, brave person, but he had a faith that I've never seen in anyone else. And I do believe that, you know, the last act of his life was, in his own mind, it was a leap of faith. He knew his time on this earth was done. I mean, the one thing I think people should bear in mind about Dave, he took amphetamines for over 30 years. So he only slept twice a week. Dave used to take amphetamines, and every 3 days he'd go to sleep for 24 hours. So I don't know how that equates, but I once said to him, you know, as a joke, I said, Dave, I think you've been awake 20 years more than you've been alive. Which made him laugh, do you know what I mean? We both had a chuckle over it, but I think if you were to do some calculated stats on that,
he's probably gone about 80 or 90, isn't he?
His body was probably that of someone who was, although he was 64, I would say he at least had the body of a 75-year-old with the wear and tear on the inside of it. Do you know what I mean? So when you take all them aspects in, Dave knew his body had worn out. He knew that he didn't want to be a burden to anyone, and he also didn't want to lose any of the strength that he'd shown through his life.
Well, so one of the things I want to say is that, you know, his name will live on, and what plans do you have for that, so that his memory will stay alive?
Well, he left a video for me, Dave, which I will share with everyone, and he'd sat me down and said, look, you know, if you want to, he said, the best thing you can do after I've gone is you've got 30 years of stories. He said, like, you weren't a gangster or a criminal, and I wasn't. I've never been a criminal or a gangster. I was Dave's best mate. I'd drive him anywhere. I'd go with him, whether it was on naughty meetings or just fun meetings. But he made me feel brave enough, no matter what it was. As long as Dave, if I was with Dave, I felt brave. Although if he was getting beat up, I did run off, which I did say to him on the first day I met him. I said I'll always run off, and I did on a few occasions run off and leave him when he was having a fight, which he couldn't argue about, so I said I'd always do that.
How do you think he's going to be remembered by people?
Well, I think, you know, listen, Dave was a Marmite character, and on the day, I think the day after he passed, the interview I'd done, I truly believed that there's two types of people that didn't like Dave. There was the ones who'd never met him, and there's the ones who might have tried to be a bit rude and cheeky or tried to bully him, and he outwitted them, or, you know, just give him a smack in the mouth. They didn't like him. Anyone who just sits on the internet and wants to go, he's this and he's that, you've never met him, you've never spoke to him. All I would say is I hope that in the next years of my life that there's so many people that have reached out and spoke to me with wicked stories, unbelievable stories, that, you know, were part of Dave's life before I met him, that I intend to get all these people to tell these stories with me and just show the world what a funny man he really was, who had a strength in his faith, truly loved his friends and family, and he was prepared to take the suffering and the persecution for whatever he had to do to protect them people, you know, and he was quite proud that, and he had no issue with that, you know.
And so you're going to keep his name on social media, or on his Facebook and his Instagram and everything?
I spoke with his social media people, and Dave had before his passing, and his wishes were that I would to try and carry on, make it, you know, tell the story from my side of view. I'm not Dave Courtney. I'm never going to be able to put his shoes on. I'm nothing like him. You know what I mean? I was just his friend who my job with Dave was to make him laugh. Right, that's all I ever done for Dave, was make him laugh, look after him. That's all he ever wanted me to do. He didn't want nothing else out of me. So if I can just carry on the humour that Dave left me with and share that with people, and if it makes people smile, and if it puts them at some sort of peace, knowing that, look, you know, if there should be a debate, I think, after this, that if people have lived a life like that, if their illness is getting to them like that, why shouldn't they be able to have their friend and family around them to end their life in a more dignified way?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a final rumour I even only saw yesterday that he's still alive.
Well, do you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if Dave comes back in some form, or whether he's gone, we'll never know, will we? Do you know what I mean? He went off on his own that day. Yeah. So none of us seen him. None of us seen what happened. I hope he is still alive, and I hope he haunts the people that him off.
I think a final thing I want to say before we go, I think everybody watching this would want to thank you, Brendan, for all the work you've done over the years. And you've looked after him, you've been his best mate, and I think you deserve a lot of credit.
Well, I appreciate that, and I've been shown nothing but love and respect from, I mean, the real people that knew Dave, the real important ones, have been so, like, all I can say about Dave, you left me with the most beautiful friends, the most beautiful family, the most powerful, strong men who've got so much respect in their hearts because they lived with you, Dave. And I felt all of that. So any negative stuff, I've not felt it. It's not touched me in any way. I'm fully happy to be. I feel honoured and privileged to have, my life morphed into part of Dave's life. For whatever reason, these things happen. You bump into each other, and I just feel so privileged to have spent that time with him and to have had the wisdom he's left me with and the love of his family. So I've got no complaints. I love him with all my heart every day, and I hope that if I can live my life in a way that he would be happy with, then I'll be happy. That's would be my main goal. And his whole way of life was just make people feel good, make them happy, make them enjoy life. It's shit at times, life, that if we can all laugh about it and we can find something to laugh about, we will all get through it.
Well, thank you very much, Brendan. We're going to end this by playing Dave's message so that we can see the man himself.
Brilliant. All right, thank you.
All right, Bren. You knew. You saw the pain. I can't be fucked with all that. I can be fucked with it. So I've got them things in Turkey. And that's it. Right. Anyway, I've left you in charge of everything. And all these bits of tack that you say, you'll see what treasures they are now, mate. Right, you'll see what treasures they are. What I want to do, Bren, is I don't want to. I have been in charge of and run the biggest naughty boys funeral the country's ever had, with 750,000 people at it and a 1/2 mile long car train. I don't want to compete with any super funeral things. So I want to have one where I don't have a funeral. I just come home in a box one day. And you can sell bits of me off, right? You can sell bits of me off. You will find a way to make money. I know that. I know that. So, on my wishes, I'm not going to have a funeral. Please believe me, they remember that more than any funeral I ever tried to get together. They remember that. I didn't even have one. That's f***ing cool. That's cool. They remember that. And it's cheaper for you. Let them celebrate me being alive. I don't want a lot of people there for that. I'd have people there that didn't even like me when I just trying to get in photos. So we won't have one of them. We won't have a thing. I'll give you a couple of messages as the night goes on. Speak to you soon.
Listen, there's one other thing that I've forgotten. It's quite important for Dave. I'm sure it would be important for him. But on the last day we went to Charlton, it was reported in the press that Dave spent his last day watching his beloved Charlton. Now, in truth, Dave was a Charlton fan because I was a Charlton fan. Dave supported Charlton. But his true team and the team that he loved properly was Arsenal. So I'd like to clear up on record. Dave was an Arsenal fan. Charlton was his second team. And the following week, when I took Dave's family and a couple of friends to go there as a tribute, because David spent his last Saturday there the week before. On the morning of that game, I said to Mercy that I have no doubt Charlton will lose today, because Dave will not be happy the fact it's been reported that he isn't a Charlton fan. And with, a true to form, Charlton lost 2-0 to Bolton and Arsenal won 5-0. So I'm really happy for you, Dave, that day. I'm happy that you set the record straight. A draw would have been nice. We didn't have to lose, but, you've insisted on we losing 2-0. I'll accept that. And I'm sorry that they said you was a Charlton fan.
And another thing that you wanted to tell us about was the police involvement.
I have to say, in fairness to the police, right, they come here, they done a very professional job, and they were extremely respectful to Dave and myself and Mercy. I have no complaints with how they handled the whole thing. They was quite gentle with us, but they found the humour in Dave, even in his passing, was, obviously because of the live firearm, they'd done a full forensic check and search of the house. And they said to me, we'd probably be able to let you in. This is probably on the Tuesday. And they said, we were going to let you in the house today, but we found 2 hand grenades in the living room. And I tried to point out that they were, in fact, ornaments, but they said, no, we can't take that chance. We found live weapon in there. These will now have to be checked by the bomb disposal. So, as the policeman said in his own words to me, he said, Dave is just a gift that keeps on giving. He said, we've got a load of overtime thanks to Dave. So we'll be here tomorrow. And they then shut the road off, got people to move out of their houses until the grenades were deemed safe. So, and even the following day, when we thought, well, that's it now, we should be back in, the same officer had to come out smiling again and said to me, right, he said, we found some bones down in the bottom of the club area in one of the little cupboards you've got down there. Probably animal bones, but because it's Dave's house and because of what we found, we have got to now do another proper search, so it's going to be another day before you get back in. I didn't like to point out that my girlfriend's name was West, so I tried not to mention that. But thanks, Dave, you are the gift that kept on giving, and we managed to spend 5 days out of the house because of you. I love you. Thank you.